Hello everyone, welcome to Longarming by Jaclyn, and this is not just part of Top 5 Friday, but it is also part of Joy Sewing, which we are continuing. That is our free Wonky Improv sampler SewAlong. So if you want to play with your scraps, learn some new skills, and end up with something beautiful in the end, please join us. All you have to do is subscribe to the channel, and there is a playlist. I'll put the link below where you can find all of the joy sewing, and you're gonna sew at the pace that brings you joy, so you can go back and watch the older videos and play with the techniques. If you like a technique, make a lot. If you don't like a technique, maybe try some variations and throw those in there too. And at the end, we're gonna bring all of our Wonky Improv creations together and have a fun quilted project. So today we're gonna do the one about applique, and there are a lot of people who are really afraid of applique, and it's not that scary. So we're gonna give it a try and go over my top 5-ish methods for doing applique on your quilts at home. All right, so let's get started. So the first method I'm gonna call the interface and pillow flip, and it's got some variations to it. And this is one of my favorite ways to do applique. So the first thing you're gonna do is you'll have some fabric that your applique is going on. You'll have some fabric that your applique is gonna be made out of. I'm just gonna be putting a simple heart onto this sort of confetti situation here today. And these are Wonky Improv blocks. So we're gonna do some Wonky Improv applique of just weird shapes, but like all of the techniques in joy sewing, you can do them less wonky and less improv and use them to zhuzh up any quilt. This just gives you the power to sew any way you want and sort of unlock those skills to work without a pattern and do things your own way. So basically, you're gonna have 2 layers. You're gonna sew on right sides together. You're gonna sew on the stitch line, on the actual shape that you want, and then whatever is the back layer, you cut a little slit and you flip it inside out, and you create a little pillow tuft of your applique shape. And there's plenty of variations to do that. Nothing in sewing is exhaustive. There's always another way to do it. So we're going to look at doing that using several products and see what that looks like. So the first one is using regular interfacing. I recommend using a lighter interfacing than this, but what I happen to have on hand is Suretail. And this is heavier, stiffer. See, there's a lot of body in this. So it's got fiber, which is basically like fabric on one side, and then it's got fusible on the other side, which is little gritty knobs, little rough bumps. So it's like someone took some fabric and took a printer and put a layer of little hot glue dots on one side. So when I do this, I'm going to take my unit. I should use a darker fabric. This is the pretty side. The wrong side looks super similar. This is the pretty side. And I'm going to take the fusible side of this and put those together. I'm going to draw my shape as I want to see it, the actual shape, and then I'll sew on that line and trim 1/4 of an inch around that, leaving my seam allowance. So I'm drawing and stitching, and I'm gonna see the line that I'm drawing. So let's take a look at what that looks like. Okay, so that is your basic pillow flip and interface method. There's a million methods to applique. I call them what I call them. It's not necessarily an industry standard term, but sewing it right sides together and flipping it right sides out is what I call a pillow flip. And I use that term, you'll get used to it. So one thing, if you are using, like I am in this case, a fusible product, when you're trying to press out these edges, you cannot iron because then your fusible is going to be melting. So you can't iron this until it's in place on your background fabric. And then it'll iron there. So you want the fusible facing, when you start this process, the right side, the pretty side of the fabric, so that when you flip it inside out, it's now sticking out and it's available to be pressed into place. And most fusible products are going to have a pretty secure bond, but you do want to sew. So you could come back and do a straight stitch close to the edge. This is turned over nice and neat, so you'll have no raw edges sticking out. It's nice and stable. You could do a decorative stitch just inside the edge. You could do something like a zigzag or a blanket stitch enclosing the edge, but you'll want to stitch this down in some way, shape, or form to your final project. So bearing in mind this pillow flip method, here I've used an interfacing that has a fiber, so it's got some body to it, and it's got fusible, so when I have my shape I can press it down where I want it to go, and that keeps it in place while I'm sewing it. You could, in your little sandwich, before you do the pillow flip, you could include some batting, and then your appliques will be extra poofed, sort of like a trapunto-ish effect. And you could have like poofy appliques that have some volume up over the rest of your quilt. If you really want to emphasize it and give it some like 3D dimension, you could make poofy appliques by adding some batting. So if you find, especially if you have dark fabrics, that at this fold sometimes a little bit of the edge of this white shows, and you do not like that, like if you have a navy applique on a dark green field, some kind of fish swimming in the ocean or something, white is going to stick out like a sore thumb. So what you can do in that case is, for this back material, you can use a similar material. So I could take two pieces of this, right sides together, draw my shape, sew on the line, same process, and flip it inside out and treat a plain fabric that's not an interfacing, not a fusible, but when I go to the edge, I'm going to see the same or similar. So choose a blending normal fabric for the back of your applique that you slit and flip over. We're going to have to edit that out where I spaced out for a minute. You can use regular non-tacky Viliene D0102. So it's non-sticky on both sides. You can do the same little, make this little poofy little cushion pillow flip applique fella. And it doesn't matter if that shows or not, because when you rinse the Viliene with warm water, it completely dissolves and disappears. So it's going to hold your seam allowance under and in place while you do any sewing that you want to do, and then disappear. So this is what I call the interface and pillow flip method. If you want to use a fusible, if you want to use a non-fusible, if you want to use a water soluble, if you want to use a matching fabric back there, those are all kind of part of this little method one. And make sure if you are using a fusible that you do a really good job taking your craft stick or chopstick and manually push those seams out so you don't have those little straight lines where it's not fully unfolded into the seam there. And you'll want to use a stick for that, because if I use an iron to try to roll that out, I'm going to ruin my fusible and ruin my iron, or at least stick stuff to it. Okay, so then this is under the category of what I'd call a turned edge, because I have a nice enclosed turned edge there. So there's another way to do that, and it doesn't require having a backing layer, and you can do that with regular fusible, or you can do that with glue or glue stick. You've got several options there. Let's take a look at what that one looks like. So here's our second turned edge or finished edge applique method, and all you do is draw the line that you want to show, and you'll trim, again going your line plus the seam allowance that you'll want to have, which can be 1/4 inch or is a little generous, it doesn't really matter. Wherever you've got a curve, in or out curve, you've got to do a slit going just kissing your line. You don't want to cut into your applique, but you don't want to leave jagged edges, and where you have a point, you'll want to nip off that bulk. So I nipped straight across at the base of this heart where my drawn line was, and you can see that drawn line, I just used a regular pen because it disappears into the fold of your fabric. So you can see, depending on how good at this you are and how tightly you have been able to nip and fold to your finished line, you can sometimes get a little bit of jaggedness. In the grand scheme of a big quilt from back here, you're not going to see it. So if someone's got a magnifying glass and they're looking at your quilt like this, they're probably not your friend anyways. But if that bothers you, it's not quite as smooth as this interface and flip method. But you don't have any chance for a little bit of white peeking out around because there's no fabric. If you're in the middle of a project and you've run out of fusible interfacing, you can always do this. Everybody pretty much has some white glue or glue stick, works just fine. The glue stick dries a little faster. The white glue, you can dry it with your iron just fine. So in this family, you can also do exactly the same thing, but before you do all this, you can take some heat and bond and put one side on, fuse it down to your fabric, cut your shape, do your little snips, and then when you're folding those edges down, you can use the tip of your iron and fuse those down. The upside of that is that this center part here is going to have fusible on it when you peel off the paper, and then you can fuse this directly on your project to hold it in place while you're doing your final stitching, or just keeping it there until it gets quilted or whatever you're going to do. So you can use white glue, you can use glue stick, you can use heat and bond, you could use a powdered bonding product. This is powdered fusible from Bone Ash. You do need a special pressing mat for this one, so make sure you've got that. For this application, you will want something that's two-sided sticky if you're going to use a product in there besides the glue. Now, if you're doing the glue method, when I go to put this on my quilt, I can put a little glue there and literally glue it to my quilt block or whatever have you. So I can do that too. So this application, pillow flip, requires one-sided sticky. This application where you're going to fold over the little flappy flappies requires two-sided sticky. All right, so I'm not going to do it because I'm not really a hand sewer, but the other way to do a turned edge applique is needle turn. Starts the same as this method with the flappy flappies. You're going to draw your shape as you want it, cut your seam allowance outside of that shape, cut all your little slits and debulk and do all of that, and then you're going to go straight to your backing fabric wherever this is going to go, and you start to sew it on by hand, and you turn the little lip under and stitch that little lip down, and turn the little lip under and stitch. I don't do a lot of handwork. I don't really have the patience for it, and it's not my forte. So that is needle turn applique. I'm sure there's great tutorials out there, someone who can do justice to the technique. That is not my strong suit. But it's worth mentioning. It's a way to do appliques. Hand sewn needle turn applique for those of you with more patience than I have. So now we're on to raw edge applique. What is the difference, you ask? When I look at the sides of these little appliques that I've created, I see a fold of fabric on the side. When you look at the side of a raw edge applique, it's the cut edge of your fabric that you're putting on there. So similar but different. Raw edge applique is in some ways faster. Turned edge applique, in my opinion, is a little bit more durable. You don't have to worry about your fabric fraying in this. There's a lot more going on to stabilize, but it does require more materials, more time. So raw edge applique. There's a couple of ways to do this, but long story short, you're going to draw the shape as you want it on the wrong side. Make sure it's backwards if it's letters or not symmetrical. You're going to cut on the line and you're done. So in that way, it's a lot easier. So let's take a look at what that looks like, and we'll look at some methods to do that. So that's the main gist of it for doing raw edge applique. So for this one, I've used the Steam and Seam 2. Again, for raw edge applique, whatever product you put on the back, you will want two sides sticky on this. You can do one side sticky and then baste them down with spray baste or pin them down. But one side sticky is, you're gonna have to stick this down to your quilt eventually. So I think two side sticky works best for this. So you can do raw edge applique and you can just cut it out of the fabric, just bare, and stitch it down, and it's not as stable. These fibers are not stabilized down. They're going to start to fray. I would recommend you do a good amount of top stitching, decorative stitching, quilting, whatever you're doing when you adhere this unit to your background fabric. If you've not stabilized this at all, you're going to want to really sew it down and make sure you're trying to lock those fibers in place tightly. If you've got a fusible product on there, or in this case a peel and stick product, or whatever sticky product, permanent sticky product, it's going to help hold those fibers together and maintain the edge of the shape. So quick and easy, but the durability, you got to figure out how you're going to get the durability. So if you're not great with cutting, or you're not great with following all these intricate shapes with stitching, you've got to stitch this down to seal these edges. Or if it's just not the look, if you want your look to look like this, and you don't have a thread color, and you don't want it to look like it's got a border around it, because you're going to have to stitch that down, I would recommend going with the turned edge. But this, you typically would do like a satin stitch, which is a very dense, close together zigzag that encases this raw edge. If you want it to look frayed, sometimes I have a friend, she did little straw hats on a farmer, and she wanted the fray to look like the straws coming out. You can go in from the edge a little bit and allow that edge to fray, and I would do maybe 2 passes around at least to lock it down. It's a look. If you want it to look rustic and worn in and that's your vibe, you can do that. So you could do bare fabric and glue it down into place, pin it down, whatever's your method, and stitch around. You can do a 2-side sticky, and you could do heat and bond, which is just the glue. There's no fiber, so it's just the sticky part. Once you peel that paper away, it's like someone did a fine, thin sheet of hot glue. You can make your own fusible fabric with a powdered product, so Bow Nash. If I took this heat and bond sheet and ground it into a fine powder like salt, this looks like salt coming out, and it kind of looks like a salt shaker. And you use a special mat to protect your iron, and you can sprinkle this on the back of your fabric and iron. It makes a shiny layer as if your fabric is fusible fabric, like you're making your own fusible fabric. Then you cut it out and put it on your back fabric and press again, and it heats up that basically hot glue and fuses it to the fabric underneath. So this is like basically sheets of hot glue with paper backing. This is basically powdered hot glue. You could cut it out raw and glue it with glue stick. This is temporary. Or fusible. This is also technically temporary. And then stitch it down. So really that covers it. I don't know if it's exactly 5 methods, but those are my favorite methods for doing applique. So a note, lettering. If you're doing lettering, there's a number of ways to do it. You have to keep track of, especially with these 2-sided stickies, which way is up, so that when you have your finished product, the pretty side facing up has the letters going the right direction. And my favorite way to do that, depending on the color of your fabric, is to take a fabric marking utensil. So you'll notice up until now I've been using a regular Bic pen, which is definitely permanent and would definitely show. But I'm either cutting it off by cutting on the line, or I'm folding it over in the seam allowance and it doesn't show on the front. I've also been doing a heart, which is symmetrical, so if I do my heart backwards, it looks exactly the same. But for lettering and certain shapes, like if it's a bird and you need it facing to the left, you can't have it facing to the right. So I would use an erasable marker. So this is a Frixon pen. It erases with the heat of your iron. Remember, if you're pressing something, you're going to lose your marking. So make sure you get what you got to get out of this marking before you do any pressing. This one's water erasable. Again, if you can't put water on the project for any reason, this is not the vibe, because you got to spray water on it to erase it. This is a chalk pencil, kind of more of a crayon. This is a good marking tool. You got to sharpen it a lot to keep it sharp. It dulls to a round shape very easily. It's great for quilting because you just need to mark the general vicinity of things. Good for dark fabrics because it's white. And then this just wipes, rubs, washes off in the normal way. This will kind of come off on its own over time. So if you do that, you can take your applique fabric on the right side, how you're going to see it, and draw your letters how you're going to see it. And that avoids the whole mental math of, all right, so here's where the letters are going to be, but then I got to put it on the back, but then I've got this fusible, but which side is going down? There's a lot of opportunities in that to get your backwards turned around. And I've drawn letters that I thought I drew backwards, and then you cut them out and you look at it the right way, and you've drawn some monstrosity that shouldn't exist. So by using an erasable on the right side of the fabric, you can have a better idea of what your finished letters are going to look like when they're already there, and you don't have backwards insane looking J's basically. So here I've made my sticker of my own custom fabric sticker, and I'm just gonna put it on my fabric. There it is. Now, because I put this on top of a print and this is a light pink, I'm getting some show through there. So this is why you want to audition. I think for this fabric combination, I would want to do something with some fiber behind there, because look how opaque that is. And I'm not seeing any of this showing through. So that's another thing you might want to think about and try out when you're experimenting with this, with your side fabric. You never want to do a new method on your finished quilt. You want to cut some back quarters up and play around and experiment. So now in your Joy Sewing, you've got fun improv appliques, Wonky Improv. So all of these paperback things, you can cut them down and put them through your printer and print out different outline images or fonts. And then that's a little bit less wonky and less improv, but it is a fun way to zhuzh up any quilt with the techniques we're learning today in Joy Sewing. So apparently I forgot to film the outro to that video when I was recording that. So here it is. Happy Top 5 Friday and our latest installment of Joy Sewing on Appliqué. It really distills down to your favorite way of doing a turned edge or a raw edge. But there's lots of products out there, and the end result is experiment with it, play with it, cut up some fat quarters and see what shapes you like, and start including fun appliques, whether they're more wonky and more improv or not, onto your projects. Thanks so much. I hope you enjoyed watching Longarming by Jaclyn. Please subscribe to the channel if you enjoyed us, and have a great day. Bye!